With the help of thermodynamics, you too can have your enemies melt from the inside out. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's Scyushi. I am an amateur at this game. I never played PoE1, I played tons of older Diablo games over the years, and I just came up with this build entirely myself. Searching YouTube, I know that lots of people have other builds similar and probably a lot more optimal than me. I am specifically staying away from all other content creators in regards to this game because I want to experiment and discover things for myself so that later down the line I have a better understanding of the overall scope of the game and can hopefully end up coming up with some busted builds all myself. Because of that, you can go ahead and pick apart this build and find better, more optimal ways of doing it. This is more so trying to share my experience as a new player with something that I came up with and seems to be working quite well. Keep in mind that some of the parts of this build are going to end up being broken. The devs have already talked about nerfing Raging Spirits in particular, and this is by no means an endgame build, although it probably has the potential to continually grow, as we'll talk about when we go through the skill tree. But as of right now, none of the gear that I'm rocking particularly matters for this build other than just high amounts of fire damage and ignite proccing. And then otherwise, I just have a lot of quality spikes stabbed into this so that I have a lot more spirit so I can use more summons and use more auras because this is a heavy aura build. Or rather, it's heavy on your spirit. So ignoring the level 10 skeletons that I get from the actual staff, my skeletal warriors are going to end up having Infernal Legion. They're also going to end up having Fire Infuse. Infernal Legion is basically going to melt my skeletal minions and cause fire damage to nearby enemies, which means that the Fire Infusion is probably not ideal because they only get a couple attacks off before they die anyway. But we're trying to kill them so that we can end up having cast on minion death, but also the Raging Spirits. Raging Spirits in particular apparently is going to be limited to 5 Raging Spirits instead of 10. I'm assuming that's because other people have like completely broken builds with this, and mine is like a baby version of that. Basically, anytime fire procs, these suckers will end up spawning out, and thus I have fire penetration and fiery death on them because this is gonna be our main minions, but it's not where most of our damage comes from. As for cast on minion death, this hurt my head because for the longest time I didn't know how I was going to activate it. I saw a couple other people on the forums not knowing how to activate it as well. And then I realized you socket spells into it in order to activate it. I was just trying to put support gems into it. So yeah, I'm sure most of you probably already knew this, but for me being a new player, I feel like this wasn't explained well. In any case, we have both Firewall and Detonate Dead, and then we also have the Magnified Effect, which affects both of those. I will say if you want to swap Skeletal Warrior out for Unearth, it is going to end up eating into your corpse supply, which is where the Detonate Dead can slowly start to steamroll as you fight larger and larger groups of enemies. As for my own personal casting, I use Solar Orb, and I just have it on a long cooldown so that it can just plop down and just stay there. It seems to be pretty good for igniting enemies. I'm also using Incinerate, which I'm not really liking the utility of this just because it's pretty slow to have your character turn while you're using it. But then I use Arcane Tempo and Ignition, also Flammability as a curse with the Heightened Curse. Ideally, I would swap something out for more spirit and then instead use Blasphemy, which makes it so that a socketed curse instead becomes an aura, but it does take even more spirit and we're already on limited supply. Point being is it would be nice to not have to constantly cast this and instead just have enemies get this by being in proximity. But then we also have Cast on Ignite, which is why it drains even more spirit because it's proccing things twice. So for this, I have Fireball as well as Unleash. This makes it so that the Fireball can have a big chain reaction event. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens sometimes. And then I also have Flame Wall as an additional extra cast because I didn't even know that you could have 2 spells socketed at a time because we have Flame Wall in Cast on Minion Death, but then I also have my own Flame Wall, and then we're using Fortress as well as Spell Cascade. Moving into the skill tree, and this is really intimidating, but basically I don't know how to build my character correctly. So what I would ideally do is going up in the northern tree, we would actually have gotten these, which is Fire Penetration. Basically, anytime you're confused about stuff, just search in the bar and it'll start highlighting all of the things. So I've got like a lot of things related to my minions because this is kind of a weirdo hybrid build. But if I'm being perfectly honest, if I wanted to be like 100% fire, I would actually spec out of my minions in most cases, I think. But then we're kind of getting to the point where this class would be more beneficial as a sorceress rather than actually being like a witch necromancer. My point being is you would probably be able to end up having a much better build that would be a lot more refined than mine, especially because of my limited skill tree. This is where my lack of Path of Exile knowledge is really hurting me. But I will say that this build does work quite well for large groups of enemies. It's okay on bosses, but I'm sure there's a more busted build out there, which is why it's getting nerfed. The only reason I'm not further emphasizing and experimenting with my skill tree is because I'm not really digging all the fire on my screen, so I'm actually going to be speccing out of this build. So I kind of wanted to make this video more so for myself so that I could remember this is a build option for me. Because so help me, I wish that there was loadouts in this game. Or at the very least, I wish that the support gems would stay on the spell gem with me manually being able to take them out instead of it just being like this where they're separated now. Anyways, hopefully this ended up helping somebody with a build possibility with this game, because I know all of the experts are probably just going to downvote me and destroy me with their far better build variety options.